Okay, so we're going to continue our IELTS conversation today by talking about the writing test for both general and academic. For the most part, these two tests are pretty similar in the writing, but there is one thing that we need to think about before we talk about the test itself. We are going to be discussing the structure of the test today and some strategies to answer the questions, but we are not going to be discussing paragraph structure. This is sort of a review for most of the people who are watching the video or in the chat right now. We're not going to be talking about paragraph structure, but it is absolutely important that you understand how to structure a paragraph. So if you need that review, you can contact me, you can find that somewhere else, but it's absolutely something that you should look into before you go and take your IELTS test. And this goes for someone who is academic or someone who needs a lower score. The paragraph structure can make a huge difference in the quality of your answers. To begin, we are going to talk about the similarities and differences between the general and academic, and then we'll look at some real questions for those of us who haven't seen the test yet. For the general IELTS, we have a correspondence and an essay. So the correspondence suggests that we are writing a letter or an email of some kind. This should feel very, very common. If you have been living in English-speaking life for a little while, you probably already understand the structures that are necessary to do well on that task. And then, of course, no surprise to us, we have the essay as the second task. For the academic IELTS, task one is very, very different. We do not need to worry about writing an email or a letter, but we do need to worry about summarizing data. So that means that we are going to see a chart, a graph, maybe a map or a diagram, and we're going to be needing to manipulate and explain that kind of information, explain the key features, the most important parts of the data or information that we're receiving. And then we'll finish with an essay as well. Before we talk too much about the individual structures for the writing, let's look at some real questions. For the general writing task one, we have our correspondence, our letter or an email. Let's look at the question. You're looking for a full-time job. You need to write a letter for a hiring agency. In your letter, we need to introduce yourself, explain what kind of job you would like, and the experience or skills that you have. We have further instructions. Begin your letter as Dear Sir or Dear Madam, and you should write at least 150 words. You should spend about 20 minutes on this task. So let's talk about the instructions here. For these 3 points, introduce yourself, explain what kind of job you would like, and what experience or skills you have, we must satisfy the complete question. You need to speak about all 3 of these points. You cannot speak about just 1 or 2. We need to write all of those ideas. We also need to begin the letter exactly as they suggested. And let's talk about this important information. When they say you should write at least 150 words, the reason for that is that if you write less words, you're going to lose points. If you write more words, it's no problem. They also say you should spend about 20 minutes on this task. There's a good reason for this as well. Task one for both of the writing tests is worth 33% of your overall writing grade. Task two is worth 66%. It becomes very difficult to do well on your writing section if you do not do well on task two. So we want to have a lot of time to have that essay, to write that essay, and to use good structure, good paragraph structure, good sentence structure, all those things to show our grammatical variety. So hopefully as we train for time, we could even reduce those 20 minutes maybe to 15. So we could take 40 or 45 minutes on the essay side. Maybe we could be left with a couple of extra minutes at the end so we could read through our answers and make sure that we haven't made any careless mistakes. For task two, for the general writing, we have an essay question. Let's read. Some students travel abroad for a year before starting university. What are the advantages and disadvantages of doing this? So we're not sharing our opinion. We're just saying the things that could be good or bad about this kind of idea. Once again, you should write at least 250 words. Anything less, you will lose points. Anything more is okay. And they say about 40 minutes on this task. We already know why that's the recommendation. On the other side, we have the academic test, and we can already see task 1 is very, very different from writing a letter or a correspondence. Let's look at the information and at first make sure that we understand what we're seeing. We have a comparison between male and female, men and women. In further education, suggesting college or university, we see a comparison between full-time education and part-time education, and between the years of 1970 to 1990. The question says, the chart above shows the average men and women in further education in part-time or full-time programs by year. Okay, good. We understood the information that's being presented to us. Now our job is to summarize the information. Our summary skills will absolutely be important here by selecting and reporting the main features, the most important aspects of the chart. And then we make comparisons where relevant. So the real idea here is that we want to summarize this information in a way that we can explain not just what is being discovered or what is being spoken about, but we want to be able to discuss the interesting things that we find in this data. We want to explain it as if the person who is reading our answer has not seen the chart. So we should be able to say that we're talking about men and women between the years of 1970 to 1990 in full-time compared to part-time education, and the interesting things that we see in that data. For task 2, we have another essay, but the question is a little more advanced, and we'll see that here. Some people think space exploration is a waste of money, and the funds should be relocated to other more needed areas. To what extent do you agree? Okay, so we can see not only is it a more advanced question, we also have a little bit of more advanced vocabulary in that question. You should write at least 250 words. We know why, because if we write too few words, we're going to have a problem. We're going to lose points. And then you should spend about 40 minutes on this task, maybe 45 if we trained our timing really well. So what do you need to do in these individual questions? To start off with the correspondence, you have to explain the situation. Maybe you need to request information, or the idea that you need to perform will be in the question. The correspondence can be personal, semi-formal, or formal. This is a very important idea. You have to understand the audience that you're speaking to. The language that we use, for example, speaking to a boss or a colleague compared to a friend, is going to be totally different. And our language needs to represent that. The tone of our writing, also the audience that we're speaking to, are so important to getting a good score on task 1 correspondence. The problem itself should be common. It will be something that it shouldn't surprise you. Maybe it will have to do with asking extra information, having a recommendation, talking to a travel agency, talking to your employment, something like that. Like we said before, we have to satisfy the question completely. So if there's 3 points, we need to talk about all 3 of those ideas. Just to reinforce something that's so important, if your writing is too short, you lose points. If it's too long, that's okay. Your scores are going to be based upon, of course, following the instructions, using the proper style of writing, understanding who you're talking to, your audience, your organization and coherence, just like every other part of the IELTS test. The ways that we're being graded for our writing here should not be a surprise for us. These are the ways that we have been graded ever since high school for our writing. There's nothing here that is particularly difficult. We just need to follow the rules. For the task 1, writing on the academic side, we care about all of those same things that we just said, but there's some different ideas because the questions are so different. Mainly, the most important thing is understanding that visual information and having some grammatical features or vocabulary ideas that help us explain those features. So highlighting key features it's not about talking about all the data. We don't need to talk about every single point of information that we have, but we do need to draw some comparisons. Think about, why would this data be created in the first place? That's what you need to be explaining. Our summary skills are very, very important here. Being able to choose the most important thing and explaining it in a clear and direct fashion. Sometimes we have a graph or a chart, but like I said before, maybe it's a diagram, maybe it's a map, which means that task one is not always going to have the exact same structure for us. You might need to explain the steps of a process. So what happens first, second, third. Maybe it's about explaining a diagram, so how a small machine works or something like that. We have to be prepared for a variety of challenging questions for the task one. So training in your writing to different kinds of questions is very useful. Don't just focus on bar graphs or a pie chart. Focus on all those different kinds of questions. Same idea as I was before, 20 minutes maximum for this task, hopefully 15 if possible, and then 150 words minimum. We want to be writing more than 150. The structure for general and academic task 2 are mostly the same. You're going to be presented the essay question. The general question will always be a general topic. The academic question sometimes can be a general topic as well. Sometimes it's more academic, like what we just saw, but it can be general as well, which means that if you do get that general kind of question on the academic test, you're expected to explain it in an academic way that's reasonable enough. This can be written in a personal style, and this is a very important point. We should all be remembering this idea about personal style because it brings up a lot of confusion for a lot of people. Because we're talking about a personal style, that means that we can use personal pronouns. We can talk about our beliefs. We can say, I think, I have experienced, I have seen firsthand. Those are acceptable. A lot of people are trying to not use the personal pronouns because it doesn't seem as academic as an academic journal is. But this kind of writing is not the same. It's not a research essay because you don't need to cite your sources or anything like this. Your sources will be your personal experiences, and therefore, we need to be able to use the personal pronoun. Of course, our word limit, again, is important. The question itself will explain how to discuss the question. There's different kinds of question types, which we'll speak about in just a minute, but we have to think, are we trying to provide information? Are we justifying someone's position? Are we comparing and evaluating? Are we giving our opinion? The question and understanding the question is the most important part of writing a good task 2, because there's different functions that we will need to perform. Our ideas, of course, need to be organized coherently. Just like our speaking section in the last conversation that we had, we have to be coherent. This involves linking words and all those tiny little words that maybe we're not comfortable with, like our articles and prepositions. And of course, we come back to proper evidence. The evidence here is going to be from your life. Hopefully it will be something real that you have experienced, because it's always easier to write about something that's real than creating something. The proper evidence here is not about an academic journal or something that you have studied. It needs to be about a personal experience. So if it's something that you know, something you have experienced, something that you have read, that's okay. But we don't need to be talking about other people's research. Our abstract and complex ideas, which hopefully we have many because we're on the academic side, maybe on the general, we're not so abstract or so complex, but all these ideas need to be communicated with diverse vocabulary and grammatical structures, just like we talked about for our speaking. We don't want to be repetitive, not just with our vocabulary, but we don't want to be repetitive with our sentence structure, with our grammatical choices. We want to have a wide variety to really show off these ideas that we have. Proper style, of course, is important. For some of us, spelling is going to be a big problem. Spelling is a way that a lot of people lose points without really needing to, because even if your idea is perfect, if your spelling's bad, you are losing points here. And of course, our grammar will be important for us. Our language needs to be appropriate and accurate. So it needs to be appropriate for the question that's being asked and accurate to both the question, our grammar, all of those ideas that we've discussed in the past. If we take away nothing else from the conversation today, this is some important stuff. It's important to remember that task 2 is twice as much as task 1. So really, it deserves twice as much of your attention. Time management is very important. And in your private practice, you should always be working with a timer. Time management is maybe one of the most important parts of doing well on this test. I have written here that not answering task 2 will make it very difficult to achieve a good overall score, but to be honest, it makes it nearly impossible. We need task 2 to do well overall because it's 2/3 of the grade for our writing. The question we always hear is, will I have time? What if I don't complete my writing? Well, this is why we train. For many of us, time will be a problem. We want to make sure that it will not be a problem by the time we write the test. You should have kind of a clock inside your head that tells you, okay, it's been 10 minutes, I have another 5 minutes for this task before I move on. This isn't really a choice. It doesn't get any easier. It's just something that we need to train to. If you can get your task 1 to 15 minutes and your task 2 to 40 minutes, you have 5 extra minutes at the end to review your writing, check your spelling, check your grammar, all your punctuation, all those tiny little things that are easy to miss. Having a couple minutes at the end to review will be very, very useful. So just like what we were talking about with the spelling, it's an easy way to lose points. There's a lot of things that we can do that lose points, which are just careless. We don't need to do these things. Of course, if your answer is too short, we're not going to be happy with our score. If our answers are not connected, we aren't using our linking words, our time connectors. If our paragraphs are not organized in a logical way, so we're not talking about 1, 2, 3, maybe we talk about 2, 3, 1. That's not good. We want to have a nice coherent organization in our writing. We are not going to use abbreviations and we are not going to use contractions. So what I mean by that is if you're going to say etc., which we shouldn't be saying anyways because we want to speak about all the details in the writing, we would write the whole word. We are not going to write etc period. That's not possible. Also, we're not going to write contractions like hasn't or didn't. The reason for this, where we're not going to use abbreviations and contractions, is because we're putting our grammar on display. We're also putting our spelling on display. We want to show that we know these words and we can write them out completely. We're not going to use any slang. We're not going to use any street language. Just like we talked about in the speaking program, we're not going to say wanna, gonna, and the casual kinds of pronunciation. We're going to spell out our words completely. A lot of people forget or maybe or don't want to add evidence because we don't completely understand what that evidence is supposed to be. We already said that the evidence is coming from your private experiences, whatever those things are. We are allowed to use our personal pronouns. So always remember that we need to satisfy the question. We need to explain what our idea is and then what experience we've had in our life that makes us feel that way. We want to have organized paragraph structure as much as possible, hopefully always. Our ideas and paragraphs should be related. We need to have a combination of different kinds of sentences, simple, compound, and complex. If we only use simple sentences, it gets very repetitive and hard to read, and it becomes very difficult to get that high score that we're looking for. The careless errors and low-level errors. We're talking about some of the parts of speech that maybe we don't like articles, prepositions. We also care about punctuation, spelling, all those ideas. A lot of the careless errors on a writing are very easily corrected by a general, simple grammar review, going back and reviewing these ideas about the parts of speech, the different kinds of tenses and how they're put together. These are kinds of ideas that we talk about in the beginning when we're learning English, but articles and prepositions will be something, for example, that will always continue to need to be reviewed. They're difficult things to master. So doing some grammar review, some parts of speech review, it will always pay off. You will be happy with your practice. Also with those ideas about the careless errors, it explains the importance of IELTS practice also having general English practice. Your IELTS practice, if you make one error repeatedly, you need to review that grammar topic. It's not a choice. We see a lot of problems, for example, with the third person S. So he understand rather than he understands. This is such a small thing that to lose points on that it's just such a pity. It would be very bad to lose a point on something that is so easily corrected. So we want to make sure that we have a serious general English program that goes along with our IELTS practice. If you find yourself speaking or writing with the same kind of mistake, take a couple minutes to review the grammar. It will be worth it for you, and it will be worth it for your score. So how are we going to structure the answers that we're writing? And why do we structure? The structure is so important for this writing for two kinds of ideas. It will help our timing, having a clear structure in our mind of how to answer this question. And also for our coherence and organization, our structure will kind of write our essay for us. It gives an outline to our writing that makes it more understandable. This will increase our score because it increases our coherence. This is true for all writing tasks, not just on the IELTS. When you're writing, we want to have a structure to make it as clear to the reader as possible. The structure does not need to be a scary idea or a challenging idea. For task 1, for the general test, we're writing a letter. We have probably been writing letters our whole lives or emails. We know the general structure of the letter is, number 1, we're going to say hello. It's a greeting. We need to think about the audience that we're talking about, but it will always be a greeting. Number 2, we're going to satisfy the question. We're going to have the main body. We're going to have paragraphs that explain the problem, the solution, whatever the question was asking us. And then finally, we're going to say goodbye. So part 3 is a closing. It could be anything with best wishes, yours sincerely, love you. It doesn't matter what your closing is, as long as it makes sense to the overall tone of the writing. Right here, use the right tone. Tone is not always easy. It can be challenging for people to decide what tone should I use for what kind of situation. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. We want to include all the points of the question. So if there's 2 or 3 or 4, we need to speak about all those ideas. And then we need to clearly and directly state our purpose, which really just means satisfy the question, answer the question. The tone that we're talking about and the audience that we're speaking to is maybe the most important part of the task 1 for the general. Let's look at some different questions that would change our tone depending on what they're asking. So for a formal tone, it's like the question that we already saw. You're looking for a full-time job. This makes sense, right? We're not going to be speaking to a hiring agency as if they're a friend or family member. But in the informal sense, you stayed at your friend's house when you attended a conference in Canada. Unfortunately, you left a large envelope with some important documents in your room. Maybe for some of us, this is a little bit difficult because we're talking about a conference. We're talking about important documents, but who are we speaking to? We're speaking to our friend. We slept at their house, so we should be able to be informal and just speak to them in an informal tone. But now we have a space in between. So a semi-formal tone is, I have a nice tip here about semi-formal. Let's look at the question first though. You're going to take a holiday in France and you want to rent an apartment while you are there. Write to the tourist information officer and then satisfy the question. So in this case, it's semi-formal because you are a paying customer. In situations where you're a paying customer, we can consider this as a transaction. They do something for you, you do something for them. So that's a semi-formal kind of thing. In the informal sense, you're just speaking to a friend or you're speaking to a family member. In the formal sense, you are not doing anything for that person. You are asking and requesting politely for them to do something for you. So if you can anticipate a transaction where maybe you're a paying customer, that's the time to use your semi-formal tone. Task 1 on the academic is going to have a different kind of structure because we're not writing a letter. We will still have an introduction, and the general style is that we're going to go from general to less general to details and specific. Our introduction will be very general, explaining the graph, the table, or diagrams, just like we did before. Our overview is now going to start talking about those key features, those interesting ideas that stand out to us. And then finally, we're going to have 1 or 2 body paragraphs where we explain the features in detail. So all the way to the most fine details, we start general and finish very specific. If we are dealing with numbers like we were dealing with on the chart above, this is a good place to include those numbers because we're being very specific. You might notice that I said 1 or 2 body paragraphs. If you're only dealing with 1 graph, you can probably be okay with just 1 paragraph. But it's possible that you have 2 graphs. So if you do have that, you might as well use 2 paragraphs to separate those ideas and make your ideas as clear as possible to the reader. So with that same question that we were talking about for the people in full-time, part-time education, let's look at how we would go from general down to specific. Very generally, what is the function of the graph? The bar chart compares the difference between men and women in full-time or part-time further education between the years of 1970 to 1990. Very, very general, but it's an overview of the information. Now we're going to talk about the general ideas. Overall, well, there's something very general that we see on that graph, where overall part-time education has remained more popular than full-time education for both of these decades, right? We can go into more overall general ideas, but then we get into the details. So in regards to part-time education, now we speak about the numbers and those specific ideas, and then later we do the same for full-time education. General to specific. As long as you hold on to that general to specific, the organization will fall into place and you will have a better coherence score because of that. The task 2 structure for both tests is going to be mostly the same. We can expect different kinds of questions on these 2 tests. We can also expect that sometimes on the academic test, you will have a general question. But we see these 2 questions from before. For the academic, we do have some more higher level vocabulary, space exploration. We're talking about money matters and money problems. We're talking about funds and relocation compared to just some students travel for a year before university. Is that good or bad? You can feel the vocabulary differences, and you can anticipate that there's going to be a big difference in the grammatical structures that we're going to use to kind of discuss these ideas. I'm always going on about how important structure is, and it's good to have a consistent structure, something that you can depend on in your writing. But if you want to be one of those people, especially on the academic test, who instead of getting a 7, if you want an 8, for example, it's good to have different structures for different kinds of questions. We probably know at this point that the IELTS questions are always changing a little bit to be challenging. So our question could be about, do you agree or disagree? It could be about advantages or disadvantages. It could be discuss both viewpoints. It could be discuss both viewpoints and give your opinion. So with all these different kinds of questions, it's nice to have a structure that goes with those kinds of questions. If you're being very serious about your score and very serious about your practice, having a strategy for each different question type will make the difference in your grade. It's not for everyone though. So if you can escape, or if you can do well with a band 5 or a band 6, and that's good for your program or your immigration purpose, no problem. Maybe you don't need to worry about it. But for those of us who really need that high score for the points or to get into a competitive program, it's good to have a strategy that goes with the different kinds of questions. That's definitely something to think about. And of course, there's a lot of resources online for practice. There's a lot of reading to do. Reading good answers, reading band 8 and band 9 answers is some of the best practice you can do. And then maybe answer those questions yourself, do a little comparison. Think about the structures that you are seeing. Think about the strategy that you're seeing, depending on the question. Our essay structure is not a surprise, hopefully. We're going to have our introduction, our detailed paragraphs, and our conclusion. But I'd like to remind us about the conversation we had at the beginning of our conversation here, where we were talking about paragraph structure. Even though we're not talking about it here, the paragraph structure is so important to doing well because the paragraph structure is going to go inside of our essay structure. Our essay structure, however, is very, very simple and straightforward. We have an introduction, our details, and our conclusion. If we have a common IELTS style here, the agree or disagree question. Let's look and then think about the structure below. So some people believe that unpaid community service, volunteerism, should be a compulsory or mandatory part of high school programs. For example, working for a charity, improving the neighborhood, or teaching sports to younger children. Do you agree or do you disagree? So our structure is very straightforward. In our introduction, we're going to paraphrase the question. So for an example of that, we would say, it has been a conversation for a long time about whether high school students should have mandatory volunteerism programs in their communities. We are just repeating the question, not exactly, but we're paraphrasing the idea that they want us to talk about. Then we're going to give our personal opinion and outline the main ideas. The idea of outlining your main ideas is your thesis. We want to have a very clear thesis for all of our writing. So if we're giving our opinion, we're able to use our personal pronouns. I believe that having high school students do mandatory volunteerism programs is extremely important because it connects young people to other members of their community and it benefits the community as a whole. So our thesis has those two ideas, which will then relate to the rest of our writing. The first topic of our thesis is going to become the first topic sentence in our detail paragraph. We will support our idea, and then we'll give an example from our life, just like we spoke about. Our topic sentence for our second detail paragraph will be our second topic in our thesis. We'll explain that idea, and then we'll give an example from our life. For part 4, the conclusion, we're once again going to use our summary skills to explain all of those ideas and reinforce them. We want to use words suggesting that these ideas make it obvious. It makes it clear. It's difficult to argue with the fact that high school students must participate in their communities through volunteering to benefit themselves and the society around them. We want it to feel final. We don't want to feel like we're opening up new ideas. We only want to close and summarize the ideas that we've already expressed. Another important point, just for your memory, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's important. Your personal pronouns are okay. You can say I, us, we, that's okay. We are not going to use short forms or abbreviations at all. We are not going to use our contractions, didn't, don't, haven't. We are going to remember the differences between our speaking and writing communication. We often say that our writing and our speaking sometimes feels like two completely different languages, and this is true. We want to remember that our writing is going to be more specific. Those pronunciation rules that we learn and then maybe break when we're speaking casually, we can't break the rules in our writing. This will be the ultimate display of our grammar, and we want it to be clean and grammatical and beautiful. Finally, the most important part, grading. How do you get your grade? Let's take a look. We have a band 8 score here, straight from the IELTS people. We know that the band 8, it's the second best score. The best score is a band 9, right? This is a very competitive score for anything that you're trying to do. And we can expect what this is like. Well-developed responses, it's logical, very cohesive. All your paragraphs are sufficient. You've used good structure, they're connected, a skillful use of maybe uncommon vocabulary, rare errors. We know this kind of idea. That suggests that we are pretty close to perfect. We are not all going to be pretty close to perfect because we don't all need that. Let's look at a band 4. If you were looking into the caregiver program for Canadian immigration right now, the band 4 is enough for you. That suggests that you respond to the task not very well. You don't have a full grasp or a full understanding of the question itself. You have a position, but it's not really clear what your position is. You have a limited control of word formation and spelling, so a lot of spelling mistakes, a lot of punctuation problems, a limited range of grammatical structures. So maybe you're using simple sentences repeatedly. To see that as your score and understanding that that's still enough for some programs is very important. We have to be reasonable with the practice that we're doing. A band 8 is not necessary for all of us. And think about how much variance there is between a band 4 and a band 8 or a band 9. Most of us who are listening right now are probably around a band 4 to a 6, maybe more. But we need to be reasonable with what our purposes are. There's a lot of variance, and you might be surprised with what score you get. So if you would like to do some writing and send it off to us, we'll help you out. We'll give you a free writing assessment, which will give you a realistic score to guide your practice. All I'll ask is if you share this video, that'd be very helpful for us. You can share us on Instagram and tag us. And then send your writing to my inbox. I'll correct it. I'll create a little lesson of general English about how you can improve, and we'll go from there. I very much appreciate everyone who participated in the conversation for the last 2 times and this time. We're going to continue talking about our reading and listening in the future. So stay tuned. Ask any questions. Once again, thanks for participating.